Well, hey, everybody. I'm so glad that you get to join me for this not live session this week. We have a recorded interview with my friend Amber Johnston, who actually happens to be a member of our um, Facebook group here, Parents Dedicated to Quality Education at Home. And so thanks, Amber, for joining me. She has 4 kids and has been homeschooling for 6 years now. And she's also the author of a blog that focuses on creating a multicultural homeschooling environment. So focusing on how can we make our homeschooling a little more multicultural. And clearly her reasons for doing that would be different than mine, but both of us want to aim toward that. So we're going to talk about that today. And Amber, you've also become somewhat of an expert on race relations and race dialogue with our kids. You've been interviewed by several different groups and had the chance this year, even big names, to speak on that. So that's been an exciting development for you, I know, and that's really exciting. I'm glad you can do that. But thank you for taking the time with little us to talk about this, because I think it is so important. It's just a really important topic that's very pertinent for now, but has probably always been important and just maybe has been overlooked. And now with the culture and what's going on in our society, it's being put in the forefront,
Yes,
probably for a good reason, or good for the better.
yes.
So let's dive in and let's talk about really, this whole thing is about talking with our children or having difficult conversations with our kids, right?
Yeah.
And that might be race, but it might be other things that we'd rather not talk about. We kind of just want to, and maybe we can skirt around them. But why? Why would we want to have hard conversations with our kids? Why would we want to even address some of these topics like racial tension or some other things that are difficult?
So I think for a couple of reasons. One, I feel like that's part of our duty as parents to teach and raise our children, and not just when we're most comfortable or in the areas that are fun or easy. But that's the hard work of parenting. It's to help walk alongside these children and usher them into adulthood with as much preparation as possible. So I would say duty is one of the main reasons. And I think within that duty that we are best equipped to manage the narrative that our children receive, because they will receive the information. Okay, so it's not that if you don't talk to them they won't find out about it. They're going to find out about all the things that you don't want to talk about or maybe uncomfortable to talk about, but it's about when they'll hear it and who they'll hear it from. And so I also have been very nervous about introducing certain conversations with my children. For me, it wasn't so much that I was scared, but more that I felt that my children were so innocent, and I felt like talking about some of these harder topics would kind of burst that innocence bubble, and I didn't want to do that. But at some point, I just made the decision that I didn't have to burst it all at once, but I could slowly begin to let the air out, and I would control how fast the air came out, and I would control what their ears heard about whatever this topic was. And I chose that route, and that's kind of how we've been operating in our home.
That's so good. I like that concept of, because if they get it from somewhere else, it comes out of the blue,
Yeah.
usually, right? And it sidelines them and us. So now that innocence that we're talking about, whoosh, it's
Yes.
gone in an instant.
Yeah.
And now we have to do triage, right?
Right. And it's
Instead
always
of,
harder to fix it afterwards
sure,
than it is to start it.
instead of being proactive, right?
Right.
And dialoguing. I think that, at least for me, that innocence component was key for a very long time. Like that really was one of benefits I saw of homeschooling was that my kids didn't have to swim in this nasty culture that sometimes happens in school, you know, on the school bus and in the playground and all that kind of stuff. And so I liked that aspect of homeschooling. Um, but I have found, so I've been homeschooling for 20 years, right? And I've even found the difference from my oldest. I could kind of do that, you know, because we, dare I say this, really aged me, but we barely had the internet when I
Right.
started homeschooling, you know, and now my youngest is on a phone. He doesn't own his own phone. I
Yeah.
will say that because I am a big proponent of postponing the smartphone owning by children
Yeah.
for as long as possible. But he's on a phone or a computer every single day
Right.
and has that opportunity to be exposed to all kinds of stuff, even from just a little pop-up ad, you
Yes.
know, on Google or whatever, to stuff that I could filter much easier with my older girls. And
Right.
it really isn't even an option anymore. I feel like in our culture today, there isn't a filter, or there isn't as much of a filter. They are, like you said, going to be exposed to it. It's just when and how.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that age component, and the idea of, you know, should we start from the get-go? Should we wait? How do we do that? Is it different for different kids? How did you determine that for your family?
So I think it's a few different things. One, you kind of touched upon it a second ago, but birth order absolutely matters. As much as we want to say that we hope it doesn't or we wish it wouldn't, but my oldest, I curated her entire environment. And so her introduction to everything was 100% age appropriate, because if there was something, an exhibit at the museum that I didn't want her to see or read, we just didn't go in that room, or we didn't go to the museum. We would go somewhere else. Or if there was a book I didn't want her to read or pictures I didn't want her to see, they just weren't in our home. It is so much harder with, say, like my fourth kid, where there are things I might not feel that he's ready for, but the older siblings are, and I'm not wealthy, I don't have a nanny. So if we're all going to see the Civil War exhibit at the museum, he's there too. And whatever he picks up from what the museum, you know, docent or leader is talking about, he picks up. And there are books that my third child, who's my emerging reader, there are books on the shelf that I would prefer, I don't want him to read yet, but they're on the shelf now because I do want my older kids to read it. So I do think that you have a little more flexibility depending on birth order. I think that it matters the child's personality. So different children have different sensitivities for different types of things. So I've heard people talking about certain books that, I'm so sorry. Mommy's recording right now. Okay, go ask Daddy or Sissy. Go. Okay, I will tell him it's okay.
You're
I'm so
fine.
sorry.
I just waved my own son away.
That's
Just
real
go.
world, yeah. So that's a 4-year-old, and I can wave older kids away, but 4-year-olds don't care about that. The big
Exactly.
eyeballs. So anyway, hopefully that's endearing for people. So I think that different children have different sensitivities, and I know that there have been some books that some of my children have loved, and then I've gotten online and I've seen where parents were like, "Oh my gosh, I had to stop reading this. My child was getting so upset." So things like violence, war, battles don't impact my children. But I have a child who's very sensitive to even the appearance or description of certain types of evil. So the dark, foreboding skies, any type of symbolism of, you know, evil. But the rest of my kids are fine with it. They're looking at
Yeah.
her like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
So I think you have each child's individual tendencies. They're all different. And then you also have like kind of what environments your children are going to be in. So at certain times, like right now during COVID, coronavirus, it's very easy for me to own the narrative of everything because my children aren't going anywhere where I'm not. Church is online, everything is online, or they're not doing it.
Yeah.
But before, you're in a different room for your youth group for church. I'm not in that room. You are in Girl Scouts. I'm not always there. Sometimes I am. You're playing volleyball or at ballet. I'm not there to hear in the room what everyone's saying during your water breaks. I mean, all these little moments of time. And so it's then where you're deciding, okay, how much do I need to prepare my child for the potential that someone else will introduce new information to them? It could be how much of an avid reader is your child. If your child isn't reading on their own, you have a lot more control, even when
Yeah.
you're reading aloud. I mean, I remember I would change words and
Yep.
everything.
Yep. Skip
And
sentences.
yeah, I can't do that anymore. They're like,
Right.
no, that's not what it says. I can't skip pages and things like that. So I think there's not just one thing. You have to look at the collective situation of your individual child, your lifestyle, who else is speaking into their lives, who else might they run into, what are they ready for, and so on. But I do think that if you want something to become natural, there are some things you are going to have to expose and introduce them to at a very early age so that it becomes normal. It doesn't have to be a conversation where, hey, let's sit down on this day and let me tell you about this big hairy thing. There are some conversations that might end up happening closer to that, but there are some things that just are, and you can present them as just being what they are by
And
presenting.
would you say that race relations or the whole notion of race and color is one of those things?
Yes, I think that for children, you don't have to talk about it as much in the beginning. The very first stage is just the images. They're using picture books, they're watching maybe little shows on television or a movie that you've chosen for them, or like images in their playthings, their dolls, their action figures. Those things, just having a variety of different types of people and looks, and yeah, race, and even transcending beyond that, age. And I mean, my kids have some elderly dolls, which people think is so funny, but mixed ages, being part of a family or part of a community, special needs in all its various forms. But yes, I think that having a child where they always assume that there are lots of different types of people and that's normal, like, no big deal. We don't even, it's just a thing. It's not a thing. It just is a gift that you can give them, because then what you're taking away from them is this need later in life to overcome, like to start to think about that as like this thing,
Mm, mm,
versus it just being what it always has been.
yeah, yeah, I can see that. That's good. Um,
I want to add though, that's
yeah,
different than like maybe the conflict, to talking
okay,
about potential
sure.
conflict early.
Yes,
Right. So one is like, I'm not saying that your 3-year-old, you're like, so there's this thing called slavery. You know what I
right.
mean? And that's
Yes,
not what we're talking about. What I'm talking about is more a visual image
yeah,
of that this is what the world looks like and people in the world, and everyone's not just like me.
yes. Well,
And so,
I think I got stymied because I was trying to think how to phrase this question. I used to, and I know this is debatable, maybe even among minorities or people of color. You might have a different answer than someone else, so that's fine. And if you do, you can say, well, this is my
yeah,
perspective, but maybe not everyone's. But I for example, if my kids were describing somebody to me, oh, mom, he's the black kid on the soccer team. Okay. And I used to say to them, why did you describe him that way? Couldn't he have been the kid in the red shirt? But then there started to be this conversation in our culture where it was like, no, because the whole idea used to be, let's be colorblind, right?
right. Yes.
And now it's like, no, we need to be aware of our color differences and even maybe our cultural differences, and yet understanding and accepting of them. Would you say that that's the goal, the aim?
I think it's not taking away the recognition of the differences. It's taking away the negative connotation associated with those differences.
Okay,
And so
that's
to say like, oh, that's the black kid, and that's cool, but it's very different than being like, the black one, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like that there's a
Yes.
negative connotation. So if it's just an observation, she's the blonde girl that used to sit in the back of the room. You remember who I'm talking about? You know, we use these different descriptors to simply explain to someone what we're talking about, but there's no judgment associated with it. I think it becomes when we start having by using that verbal trigger, it then conjures a picture in our minds of maybe stereotypes, maybe true things, I don't know, positives and negatives of who that person is and where they kind of fall out in society. And I think sometimes we bring, as adults, we bring that baggage in with, you know, bring that baggage into the children when sometimes they're not even
They
thinking.
don't have it.
Yeah, they
Right.
don't have, they're just like, they're just trying to describe to you who it is. And so I think that's one, you know, that's a perfect example, what you just gave.
And so instead of, and we could probably translate this to other things, you know, the talk, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
Like we bring baggage into this stuff that make it maybe more than it needs to be or more uncomfortable than it needs to be. And if we've been dialoguing all along on some of these issues, or at least in age appropriate ways, you know, like you were talking about, sort of a little bit here, a little bit there, then it doesn't have to be, maybe it helps remove that baggage that we carry with us when we're dialoguing with them.
Yeah, I think that's true. And you know, that's another point when you talk about the talk. Part of that, like an example would be when we're studying about the presidents, perhaps. And there are certain books that talk about you know, this president or this person, it doesn't have to be a president, fathered a child with an enslaved person. And, you know, what all does that mean? Well, when I'm reading and talking to my children about that, I just say that and they're usually fine with it. They're not thinking anything about it. And so I don't talk about rape, sexual assault, things like this because they don't, I'm talking about my younger children, they didn't know what sex is. So you are also laddering things to a late, in our minds, we're like, oh my gosh, I can't talk to them about that story because then I have to tell them about all this really horrible stuff. And it's like, no, you only have to meet them where they are. So you're going to tell them that story. You're just going to say he fathered a child with them. And the kid might be like, they probably aren't going to say anything. They're just like, okay, he did that. And if so, you ask questions like, did she want to do that? She may not have wanted to do that. We can guess that she probably didn't want to, but they're still not putting all of it
Yeah.
together. And then once they know, okay, this is what sex is, and you're talking about consent and things like that, now when they hear this story again, it's going to bring on so much added meaning. So I think
But
that
now they're probably ready for that,
yes,
emotionally.
right,
Mhm.
because they know more, they can conceptualize what that means. And so there's no need to, I guess, we can tell part of a story and we can glaze over certain parts and tell the fullness of a story without, we don't have to ignore the entire story because there's a part of it that we know our child's not ready for. And we can come back around. Like it's never the only time you're going to tell this story. So I'm telling you this story and it's like a spiral. And the next time I tell this story, you're going to pick up a little more. And the next time you hear this story, you're going to get a little more. And that's a natural learning experience.
Sure.
But I think what we sometimes do, we say, this story has something bad or difficult in it, so I'm not going to tell the story at all. And so then one day you're like, you know, like, and the kid's like, what? You know?
Right.
So
It's
I
too
feel
much
like
then at that point, maybe.
it is. It's a lot. And it's all coming after they've already started to form their thoughts about how certain things occurred or what the world is like. And then you're bringing in these zingers to be like, well, really the world wasn't like that, or it's not like that. And so I prefer to think of it as like layers, like I'm laying this layer and I'm going to come and lay a layer and I'm going to come and lay a layer versus we're just going to talk about daisies and roses. And then one day when you're like 13, I'm just going to dump concrete all over your garden, you know?
Right.
So yeah,
that's a good analogy. I like that analogy.
Yeah.
When you do, like, as we're laying layers, do you feel like that can just happen? I mean, I know it probably can just happen naturally in the course of conversation, but are there other resources that you've found to be really helpful to do that? I'm assuming books are one of them.
Well, yeah, and books, and specifically picture books, they have just been a godsend for me because picture books, one, are enjoyable, and you can get them in a range. So you can have like something that's very basic, very simple, all the way to a picture book though that's deep and really
Yeah.
gets to the root of the issue. So it gives you a progression, a natural progression that you can follow along with. And it's a simple way to have something to speak from, especially if you're uncomfortable or nervous about what to say, and it allows the child to experience something in story form, which puts just a little bit of separation between, say, a news story like the newspaper and and their understanding. And I find that it's a gentle approach to introducing all the things. So typically when I have something really tough to talk about, I try to find one or more picture books that are going to walk me along through that. And that's even for my older kids. I mean, I just get more mature picture books. They're not preschool board books anymore. They're
Yeah.
more mature. But that's like my way of laying that first layer to say, and there's a thing I want to tell you about. I don't say that, but that's on my mind. There's a thing I want to share with my kids. And I'm going to read this book, and it's going to start to pour that initial layer out there. It's going to let them know that there's a thing. There's this thing, and here's a little about it. And then I look for what questions they have. What are the discussions? Not just right then. I mean, that's one time right after we finish reading it, but I'm looking in the weeks and months
Yeah, because
after
it
that.
percolates in their mind.
Yes, it does. And
And
they
it'll
start
come
making
out,
those.
you're getting a milkshake at McDonald's, and suddenly this question pops out, and you're like, where did that come from? But it came from that book we read 3 weeks ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. And sometimes they aren't. It also sometimes the initial reading of the book opens their eyes where they can see things that they hadn't seen before. So I remember the first time I read a book to my children about how all the different shades that people come in, and then we would be out in public and we would get in the van and my daughter would say, Mommy, I saw someone whose skin was black, like the color black, because she had
Right.
questioned that in the book. Like,
Right.
no one has actual black skin. And I
Black
was like,
skin.
yes,
They do.
yeah, I mean, or very close to it, but yes.
Sure.
If you saw someone and she's like, Mommy, I saw the man in the store and he had the really, really dark black skin like you told me about. Also that same conversation where I'd said all white people are not white. They're not white, right? They're different shades. They're tan, they're light, they're pink, they're beige and peach. And having those where the kids are like, Mommy, I see what you mean now.
Yeah.
And comparing different people from different backgrounds. And I said, well, Miss Jen told me her family's from Ireland. And you can see kind of a look of her versus Aunt Jules, my sister-in-law, who's Italian. And what kind
Yeah.
of look is that? And then when we travel, we recently were in Greece and I'm like, look around. What do you not see? And they didn't have it, they were like black people. I was like, that's true.
That's
But what
true.
else do you not
Right.
see? Look at hair. And they were like, there's no light hair. All the hair
Yeah.
is dark. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, so now we're starting to look and get a kind of feel of what an average Greek person looks like. That doesn't mean all of them, but
Sure.
it really did look like all of them while we were there.
Yeah.
So I think that these conversations start to open their eyes so that when they are out, they begin to see things. Now, some people would say, well, that's bad. We don't want them to see those things. No, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
An awakening to differences is also an awakening to similarities. So
Mm.
it could say that then I notice that my friend at the playground is different than me, but I really like her.
Yeah.
And it's showing me that she likes to have fun because she likes to swing and then jump off of it just like I do. She calls her mommy and asks for a snack when she's hungry, just like I do. Her grandma comes to town to visit and she has a puppy, just like I do. And so they go hand in hand. An appreciation of the differences also calls attention to how much we are the same. And then there's an awareness of our shared humanity.
Yeah.
And this is all what we're wanting for the children, not an academic study, but an actual ownership in their hearts of what they know and believe.
I'm glad that you mentioned shared humanity, because like right now with COVID, that has been a really great example for me to point out to my kids, look how connected we are. we are all in this together. But we could do that with a number of other things to help them see, it could be the environment and how what happens here, this forest fire over here causes this over there, or just any number of other things. We can really start to point out to our kids, we're all connected, and what I do here matters over here, and vice versa. And just realizing that if I have negative actions or opinions over here, it's not just going to, it's that trickle effect. And so I like
Yeah.
that. I liked something else that you said too about books at different levels. And if we're talking about, educating our kids, one of the things that I've been able to do in our home is, let's say we are studying the Civil War or whatever, or maybe we're studying actually civil rights movement here in the US. And so I've been able to get a book about the same person or
Yeah.
the same event. So Ruby Bridges, for example, who was one of the girls that integrated in the schools in Little Rock. And they've got little picture, reader books about her, which just gives the story, but at a very palatable, for lack of a better word, manner. And then you can get, full on biographies about her and the experience that she had for your older kids. So the kids can all be reading about the same person or the same event, but at a level that they can handle, both reading level and maturity content level. And so I love that, being able to do that with books.
Yes, I love it. I mean, it's like a tool. I feel like the books become a tool rather than just a story. It's actually part of your parent toolkit.
Yeah, it is. Well, Amber, I know that I don't want to take too much time because I want to be mindful of your time and everyone that's watching. But maybe give us your top three, and we probably already touched on some of these, but your top three tips, either for starting or starting a conversation or dialoguing with your kids about race or any other difficult topic. Maybe what are your top three tips?
Okay. I would say top three tips. So one we'll say is using the books,
Yeah.
right? To have the beginning of those conversations. I would say encouraging your children when they talk to you or when they bring things up, that no topic is off limits. And even when your child says something that you wish they wouldn't or they hadn't, maybe something that isn't okay for them to think, but if we look at it as children and they're testing their thoughts and opinions and views out on you, that you not like freak out and, oh, I can't say that, why would you say that ever, but instead ask questions. What makes you say that? Why do you think that? So on and so forth. Because I find that usually when my children say things that I wish they wouldn't, when we ladder up from that questioning, that line of questioning, it usually ladders up to me. Something I inadvertently said or didn't say, something I allowed them to hear or not to hear, that somehow helped them to form an erroneous opinion about a person or a group of people. And so rather than just shut them down and say, that's not true, don't say that, that's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
just give them the opportunity to share why they thought that. And it helps them with critical thinking too. I think that having um, opportunities to interact with people who are different. And yeah, that does mean people of different race, but I also mean just different socioeconomic backgrounds, different families, different places and times, all of these things gives them more experience. And the more experience that they can have in a controlled way with you by their side, the more natural and comfortable they can become. So I'm not saying go throw your kids to the wolves and drop them
Sure.
off in this place, but
Yeah.
with you,
Yeah.
right? They're going to have opportunities to be introduced to all of these different types of concepts. So I think those are some of the things I would say are probably some of the most important. But I think I don't know, the biggest thing to me is have those big bodacious conversations. Like take the stigma of the conversation out in your home by just throwing it out there. I feel like that's what I did even with sex. It's like, and that was so uncomfortable for me because I was like, no. But I just have normalized it more by we just talk about stuff. Like I'll just say something and I'll say, you know, oh, I noticed like this happened. We went to visit a church, and when we went into the women's bathroom, there was a little basket, and it had like tampons and little pads and things that a woman could take for free. And I was like, oh, that's cool. They have like samples of feminine hygiene products there in case someone starts their period while they're at church. They weren't expecting it. And to, you know, it's like inside I was like, oh, yeah, this is so awkward.
Yes.
I was like, yeah, it's just like a thing, you know,
Look how
you might
natural.
start it. Yeah.
Well, I kind of, with these difficult conversations, sometimes we have to put on an acting, like, okay, I'm going to pretend I'm an actor and I'm going to go
Yes.
in. I'm just going to act like this is no big deal. Even when inside we're like, ah,
Yes.
freaking out.
Yeah, no, I think that's it though. I mean, that's kind of what, yeah, kind of throw it out there and take away the awkwardness so that it's not awkward for your child to talk to you about these things so that they can come and tell you all their things, as crazy as they may be, that you can be like, yes, I can understand that. Let's talk about that more. And then when they leave, you're like,
Yeah.
you know, so
Yeah.
I just, yeah, I think.
And I think, one thing though that you just said, which made me think of this. I mean, I've got kids, 2 girls, 2 boys, older, yeah, a little, not as young as yours, but you know, but even within those 4 that I've got, there are kids who really love to talk to me and want to talk to me about stuff. And then there are kids who really don't.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've learned is if I try and force those conversations, right,
Yeah.
with those more reticent kids, it just makes it more awkward and more difficult. And then they're more resistant
Yeah.
to dialogue about it or to, you know, bring something up in the future or whatever. And so you also have to kind of read your kids' readiness.
Yeah, that's true.
Or willingness,
That's
and not try and force something. I can make offhanded comments, which still is going to get their mind, you know, thinking. But some of them are just much more internal processors, and they don't want to, you know, hash it out in a conversation or a dialogue, a Q&A back and forth. But I could read them a book, or I could, you know, make comments as we drive in the car. I point things out, whatever. And that still can cause that thinking process to happen in their minds. So
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Or, you know, even just a heads up, like, hey, you know, we haven't talked a lot about this, but this is a thing, whatever it may be. And it's likely the more time you begin to spend away from home, that this is something that could come up in a conversation. And, you know, I'd love to be able to weigh in on the conversation when you're ready to have it, you know?
yeah.
So at least letting them know that, you know, that this is something normal that they may be thinking about at some point, or that they may hear about, and that you'd love to be a part of it. So
That's
even
good.
something like that. Yeah.
And I'd love to throw out a tip to everybody, and maybe even to you. I didn't do this with my boys because they were less interested, but with my girls, I would say it was about when they were 10 years old. I gave each of them a really pretty notebook, you know, line notebook and a special pen. And I was like, if you ever have anything that you're wondering about, you know, you're curious about, or you're frustrated with, or you're angry at me, or you're sad, or anything that you want to, you know, you want me to know, but it's just too hard to come talk to me about it, you can write it in here and leave this on my pillow, and I will write you an answer back. And
Oh.
so it was a way for us to have a conversation without, because some things are just really hard, when you're face to face and everybody gets awkward and it's too embarrassing, or it's too, whatever. And I would say both of them used that little notebook probably until they were about 15 or 16. So for about 5 years. At that point, they kind of had gotten a little more comfortable and were able to talk with me. But they used that for, and I was actually even able to use it because sometimes, I don't know about you, but I would say or do something in the day. Maybe I lost my temper at my kids. And then God starts working on my heart, but they're in bed, right? And I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, I got to remember to apologize, or I need to tell them this or whatever. And I would forget but I could go into the room and grab that little notebook and write a note and say, hey, I really lost it, blah, 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 whatever it was. Or I was thinking about you and a conversation we had at school, and this made me think of this other topic. Whatever, I could also initiate the conversation in those little notebooks. So those were a great means of communicating with your kids on hard topics if it's, a little too awkward to do in person. So just an idea.
I love that idea. I'm totally going to use that. I think
Awesome.
it's really great because it's kind of, to me, it represents a little bit of a buffer
Yes,
between the direct conversation.
absolutely.
I grew up with a buffer. It wasn't a notebook, but I had an older sister. So I
Yes.
have an older sister, and man, she buffered for me because the things that I wanted to ask my mom or my dad that I just was like, oh, I don't know, I could just say it with her, and
Yes.
she would always give me a straightforward answer without judgment and everything. I think another thing too to point out is to remove the fear of punishment or consequences for having questions or being inquisitive. So sometimes I would want to ask a question, but I knew that my parents would say, well, how did you hear about that? And then
Mm.
if I say that Jenny told me or Scott told
Well, you
me,
can't spend time with them anymore, or whatever it is.
then
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it, because
Yeah.
now you're going to think my friend is bad. I won't be able to be around them. And so I think again, I remember when I started driving, my dad was like, listen, if you need me to come get you or whatever from any situation ever for like the rest of your life, you call me and you say, Dad, I'm using one of those come get me with no questions cards. And he said, and no punishment, promise. And he was like, no punishment. And I was like, hey, and I had to use it. And he didn't punish me, and he came and got me, and it was crazy. And he swooped in like my superhero and picked me up from a bad situation. So I think that that's another thing. If you want your child to come to you, they have to feel safe, that they're not
Safe.
going to have
Right.
consequences. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Well, good. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today.
You're welcome.
And I do want to direct people to your website where they can read your content more, because I know that even I have picked up just really helpful tips or book suggestions or that kind of thing. So Amber's website is heritagemom.com.
Mhm.
And then if you want to follow her on Instagram, the handle is @heritagemomblog. But
Okay.
I'll put all of those down below in the comments. And
Okay.
then we relish comments and conversation on this interview in the group. Anything else that you want us to know about you, or how we can support you in your journey?
No, I would just
Okay.
say, just feeling good about, thank you for letting me come and talk to everyone, and just want to encourage parents that you can totally do this.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Amber.